Hi, I'm Julia Adolphe, and welcome to LooseLeaf Notebook. Today I am joined by co-hosts of the Trilloquy podcasts, Garrett McQueen and Scott Blankenship. Trilloquy was hailed by the New York Times as thrilling, open-minded, and required listening for industry leaders and listeners alike. Today, Garrett, Scott, and I discuss their personal experiences with depression, medication therapy, cannabis, addiction, and creativity. We also touch on Garrett's controversial termination from NPR and how the two of them navigated that professional and personal crisis and were able to continue their work on Trilloquy, which was originally owned by NPR. Hi, hello.
Good afternoon.
Hey there, great to be here. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I've been a fan of Trilloquy for the past year.
Oh, thank
So,
you. I always get nervous on this side of it. Being interviewed, I really get the jitters.
really?
No, I know what you mean, and I've also heard you flip the script. I've heard you start to interview the person interviewing you.
I think it's those nerves that force me to do that, being uncomfortable being on that side of it. But but
Probably.
you have the reins today, Julia.
Oh, thanks. Well, you are the foremost expert on you, so shouldn't
Well,
be
I
that hard.
suppose so. I suppose so. Me or my mother.
One of the things that I love most about Trilloquy is how open and honest you both are about pretty much everything you discuss. And I learned the word trill from your podcast.
I think that intimacy and that openness is a really important part of it.
So how do you create that safe space for each other?
Neither one of us really lays out any judgment on the other. It's when you talk about giving space, it's quite literally just letting the other person say their piece. And I think that that is a great way to show other people that an, a middle aged white guy and a millennial black man can have great conversation, can meet in the middle and still differ on some ideas.
So I want to dive into talking about mental health. Garrett, I'd love to hear kind of how do you balance sort of projecting power and confidence and confidence in your own ability as well as, staying trill, being real, being vulnerable because I feel like I just know as a woman in classical music, I feel like it can be a very tricky tightrope walk when you're trying to navigate a system that's built on white supremacy. So I'm curious sort of how you do that dance and how that impacts your mental health.
I have to say that question almost chokes me up because when Scott started talking to me about the confidence I exude and that sort of thing, you use the word power. It's all rooted for me in I guess a necessity to live and the feeling of a right to exist. So I'm often embarrassed some of the things that people ask me to do because of my work. The different talks at these universities and things because oftentimes I just don't feel like this, genius that people paint me out to be. We can talk about imposter syndrome, but at the end of the day, I have 2 degrees in bassoon, just like everyone else has multiple degrees in their instrument. It's the different thing is that the access I had and the access that I didn't have, the things that I had to do throughout my journey just required a sense of again, I use that word necessity. I'm thinking back to my time in grad school, and I was in Los Angeles at that point. There was no room for me to fall. There was no one out there to pick me up if things went left. So I just had to. I just had to figure it out. I had to do it. So I feel like that's more when you say power and confidence. That's really more of what it is. Now, when it comes to doing that dance of respectability, I hope every day to shed myself of a little more of that because when we talk about code switching, when we talk about inclusivity and all of those hit words, we all have the right to exist in our respective spaces the way we are, especially if we're qualified for the work. I'm rooted in that. I'm rooted in my right to be. I think that's what it all boils down to.
So it comes from a place of survival.
Oh yeah, that is that is a strong word, but one that I definitely agree with. It definitely comes from a place of survival. I mean, think about this past year. Think
Yeah.
about some of the things that we have had to learn to do for
I'd
the
rather
sake of
not, thanks.
survival. Yeah, right. But there are so many people who all of a sudden, know how to record audio and put it together from three different places, like we are right now. I think we all have felt that this past year. I think that's a modicum of what so many of us have felt every day of our journeys.
Right. And Scott, you've spoken about, especially, I listened to your 100th episode. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
and you were talking about how in podcasting, unlike in radio, there's sort of more room to be vulnerable and to make mistakes, and how you're kind of learning to lean into that. So I'm curious to sort of, as the counterbalance to Garrett, or I don't know if you guys see yourselves as yin yangs, or what the what the metaphor is.
Ebony and Ivory.
Yeah. How do you sort of how have you learned to lean into kind of being more vulnerable on your podcast?
The hit word that I want to use is normalization. And for me, the easiest way to help normalize some of these ideas is just speak about them plainly. I really try to share the fact that I deal with depression from time to time, that sometimes it's debilitating. Bringing that to the podcast, I think, is important because I believe that there are a lot of people like me who grew up in a fairly conservative household where depression wasn't talked about or any mental health issue wasn't talked about. And if you did, it was looked at as some sort of a weakness.
Right.
And so I think that talking about it plainly um, not only helps me work through a few ideas, but hopefully other people will see that it's cool. You can talk about this. It doesn't mean that you're less.
Yes, and Garrett, you've been sharing a little bit more on your Instagram, just about your own experience.
I had done therapy before, not as intensely as I have been since I moved to Minnesota. Scott, and I would love for Scott to back me up on this. When you have an overnight job and you have to shift your life in that way, like just live like a vampire, as I used to say, there are consequences to that, like your physical body and even your mental state of being. So in response to that, that's when I really started therapy. As things have gotten more difficult for me, especially in these past couple months, one of the suggestions that I have been given is to just live more of myself more openly. So being more open about therapy has been a part of it. But Scott, I don't want to gloss over what working an overnight gig will do to you. Please back me up there.
11 and a half years I did that. And um, man, I've lost friendships. I ruined relationships with girlfriends. Um, there was one point where I was taking a pill when I needed to wake up to interact with people, and then one to sleep to get back on the overnight schedule. So I felt like I had jet lag twice a week, you
Was this
know?
at the radio station?
Yeah. It gives you a sense of dislocation, of disconnection that really messes with your mind. It makes you go to some dark places if you let it.
Completely. And look, I I want to make it clear that this isn't, Scott and I pushing against, this specific overnight shift. It is
Sure.
Scott and I pushing against overnight work. When we talk about mental health, we have to talk about what our bodies, to an extent, were meant to do. And living like a vampire is not one of those things.
And shout out to the people who like that, who
Yeah,
who can do it.
yeah.
So, were you able to talk to each other about some of your own mental health struggles?
Like I mentioned before, I grew up
Mm.
in a spot where you really didn't share a whole lot of
Mm-hmm.
your personal thoughts. And even though I haven't shared everything dark and gloomy about myself with Garrett, he does know the most out of everybody that I know here in the Twin Cities, Garrett knows the most about me.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry, man.
No, I was gonna say, I guess that means you better be careful.
Yeah, yeah. Garrett knows where all the money
I'm
is,
joking. I'm
where all the
joking.
bodies are. Garrett knows all of it.
In general, and I'll be completely open about this, mornings are rough for me. When I wake up in the morning, on my best days, it's okay, here we go. And on my worst days, it's just hard to pull myself up. So, one of the things I do more mornings than not is just put my earbuds in and start with a random song and just sort of let the algorithms of the internet or whatever just kind of go and go. And more often than not, something that comes up really hits and speaks to that moment. So just, and I'm a pacer. I don't know if that's healthy or not, but I spend, all my mornings, maybe the first hour, hour and a half, just sort of pacing the floors and listening to music. Sometimes I have a joint in my hand and, just getting into some music and just really living inside of that thing that I love so much is just sort of the push that I need. A really incredible performance of something, and I'm talking about all genres of music, will really get my mind going down a path that usually leads me to, sketching something down for the podcast.
So you find the creative
But I mean,
act therapeutic.
right, right, and Scott, I was, hoping that you would speak to that as well.
Part of my depressive response to everything is to try to get away from stimulus. So I haven't been doing things like Garrett. I haven't been trying to figure out a chord progression of a song or something like that. My tendency is to laze,
Mm-hmm.
to just lay on the couch and not do anything. So I've been trying to bust out of that. And another thing, Garrett, that I've been trying to bust out of, you said that you let the algorithm take you whatever path the music
Yeah.
goes, right? See, for me to get comfort, I've got to go with what I know. I got to find the stuff that I like. So I'm hitting the Steely Dan and the Van Morrison and all the yacht rock that was on the radio when I was like 8, you know, and that's what makes me feel like it's going to be okay. And so, that's escapism, right?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, it's if you're comforting yourself and you're returning to music that brought you joy in the past. I mean, I think that could be a healthy thing. Or does it feel like escapism to you?
But it certainly doesn't do anything to widen my palette, to find out more about, like, say, what Garrett and Dell are listening to, or to find out new things that I may actually like. I feel like maybe that's limiting in a way.
But
I
is
don't
that
know.
your goal in that moment?
I don't know. I don't know if this pertains to the question or not. I think I
No,
got off
I'm
on a
curious.
Um, I have discovered that there is a way to sort of pull yourself out of a funk by a new discovery. I'm thinking about, Garrett, that one time I talked about that piece by Judd Greenstein that
Hmm.
brought me out of a funk.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
trying to do more of that, is what I'm saying.
So, what outside of music do you use to kind of help you care for your mental health or stay centered? Sounds like cannabis is one of them.
I was gonna say, I'm gonna keep it real. If it weren't for cannabis, life would be a lot harder. I smoke weed most days, and that helps. Have In addition to that, um, because again, the first couple years that I lived here was as a vampire. I really enjoy going outside and seeing the sunshine when that is a thing. Dell and I are fortunate enough to live about a block from this overlook, and we have the skyline of downtown St. Paul. On this park bench where we go, and yeah, more often than not, we have a joint with us. But I think just living life. I know Scott understands exactly what I mean, but just feeling like that you exist as a part of society is a big part of my thing. Dell and I will go do a couple laps at the mall, even if we don't buy anything. Just I'm still at the point where I need to feel like I am a part of society and not just
Mm.
someone who's in my own little box. I'm in my own little lane.
When I was talking about those pills that I was taking to wake up, to go to sleep, I had terrible reactions to them, and so that's when to get sleep, cannabis was um, the perfect. I woke up not with no fog.
Right.
That was my primary reason to have it, and it also would help inspire me when I was playing music. And some of the best things that I've ever written were after smoking.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have to say that um, I know that in my family there's a tendency for addiction,
Okay.
and I keep an eye on that. I really
Mm.
make sure that it doesn't become excessive. I know this about myself, that if I have a cup of coffee and smoke while I'm having that coffee, well, then that's what I'm doing that day.
I think it's important to differentiate cannabis as a means versus cannabis as a sort of fix. So I never spark up to change my mood. I'm never just in this stressful thing and going to grab I smoked cigarettes for like 10 years.
Yeah.
I haven't smoked a cigarette in close a little over 3 years now. And so I don't want cannabis to be that. But as Scott was saying, it definitely helps things flow a little bit. As I sometimes say, it puts me in italics a little bit. Now, the answer that I wish I could give you when it comes to ways outside of music to sort of cope and get through the day to day is some sort of fitness. I think there's a little more of us. A little more to many of us to love since COVID. I hope that in the coming weeks that is
Yeah.
that becomes more of a thing.
Scott, are you in therapy, or have you explored therapy for depression, or is it something you've handled on your own?
I have in the past. When I first sought out therapy for depression, it was after a breakup of nearly 3-year relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and and I think that was the catalyst for me to start dealing with a couple of other things. So again, it was like a confluence of several different issues that surfaced at the same time. I went to half a dozen sessions because that's what insurance would pay for, and I didn't have the
Oh,
money to continue.
of
So
course.
I think that mental health needs to be a bigger part of our any benefit package that you can get from a company.
So is it something you
Um,
want to do if you could?
oh, I think I could definitely benefit.
Okay.
But it was a number of years ago. I was having issues with sleep, lost a lot of weight, and always dealing with acid stomach. Like almost
Yeah.
like an
Mm.
ulcer. And I went and told my doctor about it, and she said, "Well, have you thought about taking a serotonin reuptake, whatever,
Yeah.
one of those?"
SSRI, yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, I tried that. I had every side effect. I'm not interested in going down that road again. I can't handle it." And she says, "Well, I tell you what, why don't we give you something to help you sleep? If we give you something to help you sleep, then maybe your diet will get back lined up, and everything will kick back into place." She says, "You come back in 6 weeks and talk to me about it." And I came back and walked in the office and was like, "Hey, doc, how's it going? What's up? How you feel?" And she gave me like a Wellbutrin,
Okay.
some
Yeah.
really low grade antidepressant,
Right.
and just didn't really make it clear that that's what she was giving me. She told me she was giving me a sleeping pill, and so I take that.
Okay.
And again, here we go, normalizing it
Right.
again, that I had issues,
Right.
but once I got past the issue, it's something that helps.
Yeah, I mean, I tried about four different SSRIs
Oh man.
because the first three I had terrible reactions. I was very resistant to trying medication,
Yeah.
but it became clear I had to do it, and it was a long haul. It took me about a year and a half to find the medication that I'm on now.
Man.
And then even then, you go up and down and you try different things. So,
I know that I promised not to flip the interview, and that's not what I'm trying to do.
no,
But
that's
I
okay.
but I wonder if you could speak to your resistance to take medication, because that's one of my struggles, and one that I'm even um, going through now. Maybe, I don't know, maybe a year, 14 months ago, I had a doctor, suggest that I take something, and I just didn't want to. For me, I think all the way back to my days in undergrad, when folks were taking beta blockers before their juries, and that whole thing just seemed weird to me. And ever since, taking a pill for my mood has, I don't know, just seemed a little scary.
Mm.
Sure. I mean, it's funny that you ask that because I used to feel the same way about marijuana, that,
Oh,
that
okay.
was scary to me.
Yeah.
The idea that a drug could alter my mood. Part of the anxiety is not liking giving up control, right? You have the
Mm,
illusion that you're in control and that if you were to lose control, you could be harmed in some way. And so the idea of a chemical in my body was scary to me. So that's kind of how I used to feel about marijuana, that like, or even
hmm.
drinking. My fear with medication was similar, but mostly I think it was about the stigma, feeling like, oh, am I really this screwed up that I have to take medication?
Hmm.
Exactly.
That was the hardest thing. And I think feeling like, well, couldn't I just do more therapy? Couldn't I just, work out? Couldn't I just do yoga all day? And that was the thing that kind of got me. Is I remember my doctor saying, if you just wanted to do yoga to take care of your anxiety, you would have to do yoga 24/7.
That's the thing of it, when you talk about, the doctor saying, you would have to do yoga 24/7. That's, I think that's a part of my aversion, because, and I'm still going through this with my therapist, but I feel like when I'm really engaged, when I'm at the keyboard, when I'm behind the microphone, when I have an instrument in my hand, I'm really in that world. The triggers are those neutral spaces, those, not even driving in the car because I'm probably listening to something, but like I was speaking to earlier, waking up, like that sort of space. Or maybe there's an hour in the day that I don't have filled with something. Even, Scott knows, even my time at NPR, I was working all of the time. I always found something to do. All the way to the point to where a lot of people were, talking to me about how rest is so important, something that, I try to get more into now. But it just seems like, and as I'll repeat myself, I'm still going through this with my therapist, but because it seems like the empty spaces are the triggers, it doesn't seem like all the time a medication for 24/7 is necessary. And and I'm not a therapist. I hope no one listening to this, takes that as me, saying what anybody should think about medication. This is just me, going through my
Yeah.
thought process, and what made sense to me. But you're right. The issues have to go. The illusion of being in control. I think that was something really powerful that you said. So it's a journey. It's definitely a journey. It's a journey for me right now.
Are you saying that the spaces that are empty, you're saying when you're not doing anything, that triggers what?
It triggers, my specific thoughts, my thoughts of being without purpose, or
Okay.
being inconsequential to the world, like those sorts of things. If I'm not actively thinking about something or doing something or engaged with some sort of music, it's that emptiness that's one of those triggers.
So does the cannabis kind of help you be okay with that kind of stillness or like a period of
I
quiet?
think, if anything, I think the cannabis pushes my mind towards something. So
Okay.
if I light up a joint, I'm looking at my bassoon and thinking about what's the last thing I played, or what I need to be practicing, and that sort of thing. So, and that's what I was speaking to earlier, a means, to something. I'm not sitting there on the couch smoking a joint dealing with, my depression. I light a joint as a means to getting myself to something other than sitting on the couch and being depressed. I've talked to Scott about this, but the idea that a medication might negatively impact the highs and lows that help produce my work and produce
Right.
my
Yeah.
content, especially the live things that I do when I talk to the college classes and that sort of thing. There's a sort of energy that I feel like I have to bring to that right there in the moment, and there's that fear, at least for me, of a medication dampening the depression, but dampening the things that I don't want changed at all.
Right. That was my fear as well, that my medication was going to change my creative process. I mean, I
Hmm.
found that that wasn't the case, but I know it takes having the right therapist, having the right doctor, trying all the medicine if you want to. It doesn't happen quickly. And then there's the period of transition too, right? Like when you start, that was another thing for me. Like when you start a medication, the first 2 months can be really difficult of side effects and then they go away. So it's also about like,
Yeah.
well, when
Yeah.
is the right time? There's never a right time. But
Yeah, I mean, this is great. No, this is very important for me to hear as I continue to, you know, go through what I'm going through. Yeah,
well, I hope you feel good about your team helping you figure it out.
I mean that's something very important. Having that team every day. Think about the things that I'm grateful for. There's so many people who went through COVID by themselves. I have a partner that I live with. So I'm very grateful. For to just have that presence. I'm grateful for folks like Scott who want to deal with my madness, especially when it comes to Trilloquy and the places I try to go, and all those sorts of things. So yeah, having that community, having your folks, as we say, is key. Well, one thing, Julia, that we talked about in our previous conversation was, my termination.
Yes.
That's been the biggest trigger in my life these past 9 months. Scott, I wonder if you could speak to being that I don't know, being that buddy pass, being that person that's there. I'm sure sometimes you're frustrated with me, saying certain things, but it's important for me to have that, you know.
That I get frustrated with you inside or outside of the podcast.
Hey, either way, because you're in a weird position, and I think we figured that out now, how to traverse that. But those first 5 weeks were, that was where we had to talk through some things.
Truth. Yeah. I remember really having a lot of self-loathing during that time
Mm.
for not too many good reasons, but there were three different directions that I was getting assaulted from. No, there were three different directions that were pissed off at me for something, and they were all different. So no matter what direction I moved, I was angering someone. There was folks that thought that I was a sellout and that I stayed with APM while Garrett was terminated.
Oh, okay.
Then there were people on the other side who, heard what I was doing on the podcast and were calling me an apologist. I just had to own what I said with everyone, wait for things to boil down a little bit, and then try to give a better idea of what the intent of some of the things that I said were. Whether or not that worked, I don't know, but that was an unwinnable situation that I
Mm-hmm.
just had to ride out.
The reason I don't like talking about my termination a lot is because I don't want it to be the thesis of my story. I don't want that
Mm.
to just always be my thing. At the same time, I just hope that people understand, and I mention it enough for people to understand that that headline is gone for a lot of people, but that reality is still very real. The feelings that people had when that was hot news, whether that's sorrow or anger or whatever, that those feelings are still as pronounced for me because that's my realities. I don't know. We haven't quit yet, so.
No, and that's why we're still doing the podcast, even though we have some nerves sometime, or we're dealing with backlash because there is work still to be done, and we need people at different levels doing what they can in the
Right.
work. And so that's what I had to retrain myself to think at in my job, is that if Garrett is gone and not talking about these issues on the air, well, who is? So I have to be one of those voices.
Right.
I have to do what I can where I can, because I can't do what Garrett does, and be a firebrand. To I can't. I would not be successful if I
It's
tried it.
not who you are.
Exactly. So I'm having to do what I can where I can.
So let's tie this to mental health. Imagine a world where we all could be validated through this art form that we all love so much. Think about how that would positively impact the psyches of music students, leaving their families. And you're already under the pressure of culture shock, being shipped off to these conservatories. What if you and your culture could be musically affirmed in those spaces? Let's go on to the professional level. Let's talk about the mental health of the person who day in and days out, the orchestral musician who is playing music that they love and has a purpose and speaks to them. So I know that there are many folks in many different ways doing everything they can to create that reality. One of the ways that Scott and I do that is with our podcast, just introducing the idea of the phrase classical music, applying to so much more, not only for the sake of itself, but for the sake of the people, for the sake of the musician, for the sake of the audiences. And I don't think it's a stretch to connect mental health with all of that. Affirmation of the whole person through what we do. We don't see that in the field yet. We don't fully affirm all people in our field. We do not do that, but we're trying to create that. We're trying to create that reality.
Right. I know. I had Sydney Hobson come on Loose Leaf,
Shout out to
and
Sydney. Yeah.
yeah, and he talked about how challenging it was to, what he said was, participate as an orchestral musician in a culture that was committed to his erasure, and that was incredibly taxing to his mental health. Is that something that you can relate to?
Well, I mean, there has been a very public attempt to erase me, right? So
Right.
I think, I'm a living example of that. And that's one of the things that just, has helped me stay afloat and not completely just jump off the deep end, is being grateful to be that example.
There's a real tendency, as you get higher up within a field or in an organization, to get siloed and not have a real good assessment of what's happening on the ground. And I think that people in positions of power with a lot of these arts organizations need to realize is the conversations that Garrett and I have, the conversations that Garrett has with the guests, are happening, whether you want to hear them or not.
Right.
So you can acknowledge them and engage and maybe shift your paradigm a little bit, or you can be spiraled out. You can become irrelevant. Maybe that's a danger.
There are professionals like me, I've even found myself saying this phrase, who feel like we aren't white enough for the field. That is why we can't get in, and or stay in many cases. And that's why, it's important to build your own and just forsake all of
Right.
this or whatever. I really try to be that bridge. I believe that the future, certainly for Black folks, is building our own things and cultivating our own things. I affirm everyone who is Black and otherwise who wants to participate in the orchestras as they are, in the operas, in the radio, and all of that stuff. So we're just trying to, Trilloquy is straddling that fence in a way that I hope can just inspire the minds of enough people to push us all forward. Because quite frankly, when you turn the microphones off, when you get off stage, so many of these conversations are much more raw, much more directed, and would be way more uncomfortable for people. So we're just trying to give people a glimpse into that, so they know that these things exist.
When we started, I thought, hey, I'm a nice guy. I'm not racist. I don't have any supremacy in my background or anything like that. And then you start having the conversations and you go, oh, there's a blind spot. And, really coming to grips with privilege. Nobody wants to admit that they have it. And it, I can say it only gets easier once you do. And you start to unpack your own things, and
Right.
I think it gives you more grace, more generosity with other people.
Mm-hmm.
That you give them a little bit more leeway, maybe. Um, so I feel like I'm sort of that representative of a possible an ally that's a possible accomplice who's
Yeah.
Sure.
doing the work.
Yeah, so how do you keep going in the face of that kind of erasure every day? How do you kind of keep yourself motivated?
Keeping myself rested, going through therapy, doing my pacing and listening to the music, everything that I have to do to keep myself together. But for me, I just have to go back to the audience. I'm thinking about them. I'm thinking about offering, something to the folks who want to learn, something to the folks who want to hear me spout off about something, and
Right.
everybody in between. One of our good friends, friend of the show, Obo, is Titus Underwood, and you're in Nashville now, so I hope the two of you get together. He would be great for this show. Something that he repeats to me when we talk a lot, is that you can, only give what you got. So I try to get as much as I can, and I'm speaking to just keeping myself in line, keeping my mental health together, so that I can give. Just the question, how are you? I've put some intentionality behind that these past, I don't know, these past 4 or 5 months. One of the recommendations of my therapist, something we talk about, I'll share here, is how how self-centered I can be if I don't keep myself checked. So just, giving a lot of the energy that I want to get and putting it back out. Sometimes you will be surprised at how much someone just needs to hear the question, how are you? I think if we can just connect, create more of those networks, and not be ashamed of um, saying what we're feeling, and not feel awkward by hearing someone say what they're feeling. Just, opening ourselves up more is a means of creating those villages, those teams we were talking about. And and as I said, it's an integral part to
I
maintaining positive mental health.
I think the same thing, but I'm coming at it from the opposite direction, Garrett. In that you say that you feel like you get self-centered.
Hmm.
Um, I have to wrestle with the idea that nobody wants to hear my bullshit.
Mm.
So I'm one of those ones that'll go, fine.
Right.
And that's why Trilloquy works so well. No.
Yeah.
No, it's funny because I mean, I'm sure that's kind of how partnerships work is you start to learn sometimes where your difficulties actually are fit for each other, and that can be really hard just in, a personal relationship, understanding, okay, well, maybe I need to actually talk about myself more and you need to talk about yourself less, or whatever, whatever it may be. But sometimes it's like a dance for two, right? The relationship issues can work that way.
Yeah, a promise that I made to Scott before we even recorded the first episode was that if I have Trilloquy in one hand and our friendship in the other hand, and I have to throw one away, I just have to throw away Trilloquy.
Yeah.
So, at the end of the day, that is what we maintain, and I think that's why, we have had the success that we have had, and why, the show works, and the other work that we do works, is because it's genuine. When we talk specifically about DEI, I feel like the relationship part of it is missing in so much of what people are doing. The relationship is central to what we do, and I think that's why it works.
Right.
You wouldn't throw Trilloquy away, though. You would just have to
Well, I would
get
just press
another
pause.
co-host. You would have to just find, yeah.
But the point is, it will never be one of us picking up our toys and walking away, and that's
Right.
just it, because
Right, and
that's
I'm
not
over
why we
here sort
started
of
it.
tensing my fingers like, oh, okay. I have outsized power all of a sudden.
And you have each other too.
Yeah.
Oh. And Scott has Radar. We definitely have to give a shout out to Radar if we're talking about mental health and
Yeah,
compass and
that's
all of
true.
Who's
That's true.
Radar?
Radar is the
Oh!
mascot. He just always is on hand when I'm recording. He's that's his usual spot when I'm on Zooms or doing interviews, and whenever we record, he comes along and sits underneath the table there over at Garrett's place. Yeah, Radar is a silent partner.
It's very important.
Yeah.
Most of the time he's silent.
Well, thank you both so much for being here and talking with me today.
Sure.
Thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you for asking us on. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks. Yeah, where can listeners find you if they want to?
Well, you can check out and donate to Trilloquy at trilloquy.org, trilloquy.org. You can also check us out wherever you listen to podcasts.
Trilloquy is really a special model for how contemporary musicians and composers and classical music lovers can talk about music in a way that's more open and honest. And it really is a wonderful example of the podcast medium that I hope to emulate. I think Garrett and Scott are also a wonderful model for real partnership and what it really means to work with your friends, which can be incredibly difficult and pose multiple challenges. So thank you, Garrett and Scott, for sharing how you care for your own mental health as well as how you care for each other. And thank you for listening.